Hi, my name is TB. I'm at the Sensorica lab, and I want to make a video about culture, the peer-to-peer culture, and more particularly, I want to focus on music. So this video is for musicians, young musicians that are thinking about doing something new, thinking about a new purpose for their creations. A new purpose in life, and we have to understand here that there is a new culture that is emerging since the 90s, and people call it different names. We can call it for the time being the peer-to-peer culture, and we can see this culture in the open source movement, open source hardware, open source software, the word open, transparency. We can see it in blockchain. So this culture has emerged, has taken shape, and there is today a core set of value that is universally shared. People can identify with this culture. We have our own language, we have our own jargon to speak about new economic models, new ways of production, our daily life as peers in open networks, so on and so forth. But there is something that is missing, which is art. And in order to have a new movement moving towards the center, moving towards the mainstream, we need to have these new channels of distribution. We need to have these new channels of communication. Which can go through music, visual arts, so on and so forth. So I was thinking about music because it's so pervasive, it's so powerful at encapsulating and spreading these core values so that more and more people can adhere to the peer-to-peer culture and contribute or participate in many ways. So I want this video to be shared and be distributed to musicians as much as possible, and engage musicians in this dialogue, bring them into the fold of this peer-to-peer culture and have them participate, because this is our future, I believe, as the civilization is collapsing, as trust in key institutions is collapsing. We have the emergence of this new culture that can very well be at the core of the next civilization that we can build together. And I would like musicians to participate in this dialogue and collaborate more and more with the people that identify with the peer-to-peer culture, and together collaborate, start doing something, start jamming, and create this new music, this peer-to-peer music. So I took some notes. And I want to go through them to discover together what is peer-to-peer culture. And these are my ideas. And my goal now is just to seed this discussion. I have a doc that I made, so I'm going to be reading from it. And I'd like you to open it up and contribute with your own ideas. I'm just seeding this debate. So let me go through an introduction, and then we'll go step by step and discuss different layers of this peer-to-peer music. In order to have peer-to-peer moving towards the center, towards the mainstream, we need to build a cultural layer that vehiculates our values. Music transcends time. During every epoch, production and distribution of a musical experience, composition, distribution, and consumption of music is impregnated by the prevalent economic system, and we'll see how. For example, During the Middle Ages, artists were hosted at the court of the king. They were sheltered, fed, and protected in exchange of their work, providing musical experiences. Some musicians were living a nomadic life, going from village to village, living on donated food and a bit of money. There was no material support for music, such as a disc. Music was reproduced and consumed at the same moment. We call this live reproduction of music. With the formalization of music, composers could share their creations as a series of symbols, which is the musical writing, and the piece could be reproduced by other musicians, but consumption and reproduction were synchronous. They happened at the same time. Capitalism commodifies everything. Everything is made into a product to be exchanged on the market. There is a clear division between the producer and the consumer. Innovation or artistic artifacts, in the case of music, are canned, encapsulated as finite, fixed creations to be sold and passively consumed by people as products. The artist lives by selling the art, which is the economic model for subsistence and reproduction of artists. At every epoch, the production and distribution of music is tinted by the dominant economic system. So today, musicians, or producers of music, create a song and they sign it. It signals and clarifies their role as producers. A legal system protects a market monopoly of the artist over his or her creations, like patents protect innovation. This is the notion of intellectual property or authorship rights, a fundamental concept in capitalism. The song is sold for passive consumption, as we said. The consumer is not allowed to participate, to modify it, to make his own the song, other than signing a deal with the artist. We can see this with electronic devices, for example. You can open your mobile phone and easily change the battery or replace the camera with a better one. In other words, the song is not distributed as open source software or as an open PC architecture where you can go inside and change parts and add new functionality. And this open source culture, as we said in the beginning, is part of this peer-to-peer culture. So we have ownership, we have canned products, market exchange, and passive consumption, as well as a clear distinction between producers and consumers. That's the capitalist pattern that we see in music and in everything else around us. This is not a critique of capitalism. It is an observation that this type of relationship between music and the prevalent economic system is present at any epoch. We need to rethink music outside of the capitalist paradigm to imagine what music becomes in a peer-to-peer world, and this is what the discussion is about. So let's go one by one at different dimensions of music and the relationship with the economic system that I identified, and just scratch the surface, okay? Because again, this is just a seed of a debate, of a larger debate. What are the core values of peer-to-peer? So musicians should think in terms of these core values, and these core values should be transparent in their music production. So the core values underlying the peer-to-peer culture are the following. Non-elitism. Everybody in the network is a peer. That's why we call it a peer-to-peer. A peer-to-peer movement or a peer-to-peer culture. Governance is horizontal. which means non-hierarchical. This culture has the negation of power relations and the replacement with value-based relations. Sharing is big in peer-to-peer culture. Collaboration, openness, transparency, freedom, and fairness. The peer-to-peer culture is wide in scope. In fact, it proposes to build a new world. The entire chain of the musical experience, from production and active consumption, must be in tune with these core values. Let's dive now into the economic layer. About peer-to-peer economic models, the music is not a commodity, but a shared experience, where the division between the creator of a musical piece or creators and the consumers of this music is blurred. We need to go beyond music as a product. Music is not just a passively consumed artifact, but it becomes a participatory experience, like with any artifact in open source software or hardware. We're talking about active listening and not passive listening. And we're going to talk about active listening as we continue to discuss below. We need to think about incentives, how to distribute benefits to those who create music. So we need some forms of contribution accounting. If many musicians compose a musical experience, create a musical experience, and that musical experience is distributed, we need to make sure that the contribution of every peer involved in this production of experience is accounted for and could be rewarded in some ways. And there is software, there are tools that have been created precisely for this. We need to think about new wealth. So stop just thinking about money, as we believe that in a peer-to-peer society, monetary currency will not take a central role. So we need to think about new forms of wealth. What makes a musician rich? Is it just money? In other words, this question leads to what is that provides a musician access to resources and experiences, which is what we're looking for in life. And in a capitalist society, access to resources and experiences are almost entirely mediated by money. We believe this is not going to be the case in a peer-to-peer society. So what are the new forms of wealth that are emerging? And how can we use these new forms of wealth to reward musicians to be able to live a full life? So we're talking about new incentives and new models of subsistence. Talking about the economic layer, we have to look into blockchain technologies, DAOs, DAO, or distributed autonomous organizations, open value networks, NFTs, and other creatures like that. We need to think about new tools to produce music, and we'll talk about that a little later. We need to think about new tools to distribute a musical experience. And we need to think about new distribution models for these experiences. So that is the economic layer. We're just scratching the surface. And now let's move forward to the creation process. How is music produced in a peer-to-peer world? One of the most important concepts in peer production is stigmergy. Now, for those of you who don't know what stigmergy is, it is the way ants forage and the way they create their anthills. So stigmergy is the use of the physical environment through the intermediary of pheromones to communicate and signal to other ants around them what has been done and what is to be done next. So just to picture how stigmergy works, ants go out of their nest and start going in random directions. And at some point, one of them finds a source of food, takes a bite, runs back to the nest, and as it goes back to the nest, lays down a path, a trail of pheromones, which are some chemical compounds that could be sensed by other ants. And there are different types of pheromones, and when another ant comes into contact with these pheromones, they understand in their own way that there is food somewhere. So the pheromone is an indication of something and an instruction at the same time. These pheromones changes the behavior of other ants. So the second ant follows the trail of pheromones and finds the food that was discovered by the first one, and takes a bite, runs back to the nest, gets excited, and lays more pheromones on the same path. And the third ant picks up that scent, follows the trail of pheromones, finds the food, gets excited, runs back, and lays down more pheromones. So the bigger the pile of food that was discovered first, the more intense the scent of pheromone gets as every ant comes back and lays down more pheromones. Now these pheromones evaporate with time. So if the pile of food finishes because it gets carried by the ants towards the nest, in time this scent disappears and that trail just dies. So what we see here is that over time, the random walk of ants to forage for food organizes into very specific paths that lead to where food is. So that is a mode of coordination. It's a mode of indirect collaboration, and it helps very simple organisms that individually they're not very intelligent. It helps them to coordinate and solve a very fundamental problem. And what we have is the emergence of collective intelligence, swarm intelligence. When we look at the ant colony, it seems to act as an intelligent being able to solve very complex problems, finding food. But in the end, it all relies on the physical environment, the pheromones, and some very, very simple rules of interaction based on these pheromones. So that is stigmergy. This is how ants do it. And there is stigmergic behavior in human society, and peer-to-peer is all about stigmergy. Okay, think about how open source software is produced. Somebody goes out there, writes a piece of code, and leaves instructions behind how you could use it and how you could improve it. And these are the pheromones. These are digital pheromones. Puts that on the internet. Other people see it. And then read these instructions and start contributing to the software. And over time, the software becomes more and more complex. And these people give themselves some very simple rules of communication. And that's how open source software is built, by thousands and thousands of people contributing the same way ants contribute. It's a form of indirect collaboration. Everybody's an individual, everybody's at home alone, Nobody knows anybody else, but yet all these people are able to build something very complex. Wikipedia, if you look at it, is an anthill. It's an anthill of knowledge. Millions of people write Wikipedia a word at a time, a phrase at a time. And over time, we have this huge anthill of knowledge where you can find almost everything you want. Okay, so that is stigmergy. And so when it comes to the creation process of music, if we want to stay within the pattern of the peer-to-peer movement, of the peer-to-peer culture, the production of music also must be stigmergic. So the music, a piece of music or a music experience, is created like an anthill. That kind of production can be synchronous or asynchronous. Synchronous meaning that a bunch of people get together in a physical space or on the internet and they start jamming. And they give themselves some very specific rules. A very small number of rules, very clear rules. And they decide on some sort of pheromones, sound pheromones, the equivalent of these physical pheromones or the digital pheromones in the case of Wikipedia or open source software, which could be a string of notes that can tell the other players where to go next. So that would be something of stigmergic production of a musical experience. In my opinion, I'm not a musician, I can't speak your language, I'm not trained in music theory. So I can't speak more in detail than this. I could just communicate the peer-to-peer pattern and culture to musicians, and I can participate in this discussion and discovery of what peer-to-peer music is. But that's the way I can see it. So if you look at a symphony, if you go at a musical show and you look at a symphony, you see a bunch of musicians that are following a script. That musical experience is canned. We know exactly where it starts and where it finishes. There is no room for creativity. There is no room for emergence. If you look at jazz, for example, there's a bit of space for creativity. The rules are very strict, but it opens up a space for emergence, for improvisation. So if you look at a bunch of musicians start playing jazz, you kind of know the underlying structure, but you don't know exactly how this is going to play out. So that is not a canned musical experience. Okay, it's a bit more emergent. In Montreal, there is another phenomenon, which is it's an event every weekend. It's called the Tam Tam, where a bunch of people go and they have percussion instruments mostly, but there's other people with some other type of instruments that can come there, and that musical experience is even more open than jazz. Somebody starts with a beat, and other people jump in, and they add their own color to it. And there's the space of improvisation, the space of emergence is much wider than jazz because the rules are not so strict. So we can see here a progression between canned musical experience towards something that opens more and more towards emergence. So that musical experience becomes more stigmergic. But it's not as far as stigmergy. about self-organization, and we have to understand that self-organization can go in multiple directions. So I suppose that a stigmergic production of a musical experience must have a set of clear rules, the equivalent of sound pheromones, and that initial structure on which we build will define the subspace of possibilities where this musical experience can go. So these rules and these pheromones, this basic structure on which we create, on top of which we create this musical experience, would be something that at the same time restricts where this self-organization goes, but allows a space for emergence. So it is restrictive and opens for creativity at the same time. Okay. Another concept in the creation process, it's the concept of interaction. Interaction between the creators of music, the participants, those who play an instrument and add to that musical experience. And that interaction speaks to spontaneity. It is an unframed interaction. But always following this set of rules. So this process of creation, through it, the musical experience is emerging. It is self-organizing, and emergence and self-organization are also key concepts in peer production. Talking about the lyrics, I don't have a lot to say other than that they should vehiculate these core values that we already spoke about. They should introduce the masses to the new ways of doing things, to this new culture, to this new movement, so that peer-to-peer becomes a second nature. Instrumentation or tools for producing music is also very important. When we look at open source software, we saw the creation of more and more sophisticated tools to help people collaborate on a massive scale. So we have things like GitHub. Now, if you're a musician and don't know what GitHub is, it is a software, collaborative software, and also a database, a repository. So people can store their open source software, and then there's a bunch of functionality around that allow people to propose new solutions, that allow people to find mistakes and generate an issue, telling other people that there's something to work on here. You can join the project. You can submit a new code to be integrated into the main code. There is discussions, messaging. So there's a bunch of tools that allow these people to co-create and that can support thousands and thousands of programmers working on the same code. The wiki is the software behind Wikipedia. Wikipedia cannot exist without the wiki. So the wiki is the tool that allows millions of people around the world to produce this knowledge anthill. But before the creation of the wiki, Wikipedia could not exist. You cannot write an encyclopedia in an open way, in an emergent way, if you don't have a tool to do that. So music, the creation of the production of this peer-to-peer musical experience needs some new instruments. And these instruments are not just for the production of this peer-to-peer musical experience, but also for distribution and consumption. So when we think about the player, which is the tool that we now use, everybody has a musical player on their cell phone. if we look at this musical player, it has capitalism embedded into its architecture. It is made to consume a song, a canned musical experience, detached from the consumer, from the producer. I'm listening to a song. I cannot contribute to that experience. It is what it is. So how do we see production and distribution of music as a peer-to-peer musical experience? So first of all, on the production side, the instrument should allow easy participation. So anybody, any listener, can be part of this creation process. In order to tap into this culture, maybe these instruments need to be electronic. The cell phone is a very sophisticated machine, can be made into a musical instrument. Everybody has a cell phone. Everybody that goes into a park can get together and swarm a musical experience. Swarm is another concept used, it's another word from the peer-to-peer culture, right? Now, obviously, a peer-to-peer musical experience is not just confined to a physical space. It can be lived in the digital environment using the internet. So a bunch of people from across the world, they can use a tool to create and at the same time live or consume a peer-to-peer musical experience. And we can see that with discussions. You go on Zoom and you can have a debate, you can have a discussion, you can have a presentation. Different forms of interactions. You can have a round table. You can have an emergent discussion with some very basic rules. Passing the baton, for example, where the topic is not decided in the beginning. And the Zoom is that digital environment where this experience takes place. So what is the Zoom for a musical experience? You should allow people to input sound. You should allow people to also just participate as listeners. And anybody that participates as listeners, they could jump in and contribute to that musical experience. And that is the dissolution of this wall between producers and consumers, between musical creators and listeners. And when you go to the Tam Tam, the experience that I told you about in Montreal every weekend, you can walk into that park where it happens with your own percussion instrument. Or you can just go there to listen and to dance. But if you bring your percussion instrument, you can just sit around and add your own sound to the whole musical experience. So the most important thing here is that the instrument needs to be able to tap into this peer-to-peer culture. And if we look at the makeup of this culture, those that have created this culture are programmers and hardware engineers. And if you wanna tap into this crowd, we have to provide musical instruments that they're familiar with so that they could participate. And we have to understand that these musical instruments can allow the conversion of a listener into a participant. So here's the thing. When you listen to a song, often you find yourself tapping a beat. And sometimes you're improvising. That beat is yours. What you're doing is that you're adding to your musical experience. You're consuming a canned piece of music and you're adding to it by tapping on the table. What you can also do is I add some voiceover. I find myself doing that very often. So I listen to a music and then, I vocalize something on top of that. That is the key idea on which musicians can build. It's how do I bring the listener into that live experience or asynchronous musical experience? How do I allow this individual not just to passively listen to a song, but to actively listen to a song? So the instrument of consumption is at the same time an instrument of production. So if I listen to a music on my phone that has at the same time sensors and can produce music, that player, if I start waving my hand, I can add a new type of sound on top of that music. And so the listener makes that music that has been already created by other people in a peer-to-peer context, the listener becomes a producer for his own little experience. Or if I have my friends around me and we're having a beer and we're playing some music in the background, somebody can pick up his phone, connect to that musical device, and enhance the experience. Start jamming with that piece of music. Okay? So that is another idea about how these new instruments can bridge the divide between producers and consumers. An important question here is about the genre. What is the sound and the sound bit that taps into this peer-to-peer culture? So we have to acknowledge that the peer-to-peer culture is there and is growing exponentially. So there's a bunch of people that already identify with the culture and share these core values. We have to ask ourselves the question, who are these people? Make a list of what they do, how do they live their lives, and try to understand what is the sound that they easily associate with. If any musician wants to start engaging in peer-to-peer music, needs to deeply understand this culture and create a sound that resonates with this particular crowd. I don't have any answer for that, and I don't think anyone can have an answer for that. This is just a sort of a trial and error and practice. Now let's talk about the structure here. Dive into the structure, which is another dimension that I want to address. So let's do a parallel between capitalism and peer-to-peer. In capitalism, you have companies, which are units of production. The form of organization of production is encapsulated as a corporation. And this is like a closed box. You can always go to a company and say, how many employees are there? And they can tell you, and you can ask how much money the company has. What is the budget for this thing? In capitalism, an organization of production, a corporation, is a box, is a finite universe. You can have a precise number for every one of these questions. In peer-to-peer, you have open networks as organizations, so you cannot ask the question, how many people are into this open source project? I can tell you that today there's 50 contributors. Some of them have slacked out. Some of them are still active. There's a core maybe of 10, 5. But next week there could be 1,000. So it's a very elastic form of organization. It's an open network. You cannot ask what is the budget of this network, because all that depends on how many people are there and what kind of resources they bring in. So if we transpose that to music, the equivalent of the corporation is the band. How many people are in your band? Well, we have 4 people. That's finite. that is the unit of production of that music that these individuals produce. What if we transpose that into the peer-to-peer domain? So we have to think about an open band. We have to think about an open network. How is Wikipedia created? How many people, how many editors are in Wikipedia? We don't know. We don't know. Maybe there is 2,000 today, 20,000 tomorrow. Every day you have a different answer. Wikipedia is written by an open network of people. And some jump in, make a contribution and never come back. Other people make a contribution a day. So it's something that is very fluid, very dynamic, and very open. So in terms of the organizational structure of music, we have to think about open networks and the concept of open band. So you have one artist that has a musical idea, seeds that musical idea to create a musical experience, and then whoever comes. How many musicians are going to be at the Tam Tam this summer in Montreal? We don't know. Every week we don't know. People don't sign up. There is no planning. Whoever shows up and contributes to that musical experience. Okay? So that is the concept of open band, and you already have these concepts live. We have examples of them. We're not starting from scratch. So that open band can produce itself live, can happen live in a physical environment or in a digital environment, or they can end up recording this and distributing it in a way that bridges the divide between the listener and the creator. So here again, once the musical experience is over, you have a bunch of people gathering on a physical or digital space and produce a musical experience. That could be recorded. But once recorded, it does not have to be canned. It could be distributed. And we already spoke about these tools used to listen to a music that has been created, that allow participation, that allow the listener to add their own. So that piece of music remains open for the listeners or for other musicians to remix it the same way DJs do today. So the DJ sphere is another one of these examples. So the peer-to-peer culture in music is everywhere, but it has not been gathered in a systematic and coherent way. But we see examples, we see it appearing here and there. I think what I'm trying to do here is to provide the pattern, the structure of peer-to-peer, and engage musicians in this debate so that we can crystallize that within the musical realm. But we're not starting from zero. You have a lot of references around you. One of the barriers when I speak to musicians, so going a little bit over the structure and talking about the clash of cultures here, one of the problems that we see is the sort of the ego within the arts. What do you see when you look at a painting? Well, if you look carefully, you're going to find a signature. And that signature says, this is mine. And that is related to the capitalist economic model, because we have to trace the artist in order to be able to reward him. That music, that piece of art, that canvas is a product and has been created by that artist. But that translates into a cultural element, which is ego, right? We want to be recognized as me being the writer of this song, the painter of this painting. And that goes into the economic model and new forms of wealth and incentives. But for the starters, for the pioneers of peer-to-peer music, we have to let go that ego and allow others, people that we never met, people that we don't know, to contribute to the musical experience that we seed, that you as an artist seed. So you are a seeder of a musical experience, but you don't want to control the process. Again, peer-to-peer culture core values, relations of control are replaced by relations of value. Okay? You want to be recognized as a good player, as a seeder, but not control the whole experience and be recognized for the whole experience. Okay? You're not the captain of your band, and you're not the head of the symphony, and you're not going to sign your name on the entire musical experience. We're into open sharing and an open collaboration, and we are into co-creation. We are into creating an emergent experience, not into controlling the process and coming on top as being the author of that thing, right? So part of the peer-to-peer culture, where we see ourselves as non-hierarchical, as peers, part of this non-elitist movement, it's also to let go the ego and say, I'm going to do my best to create this wonderful experience, and people will get to know me. I will have my place in this world, and there will be ways to generate a living as a peer-to-peer artist. So where do we start? Where do we start this? I'm not aware of musical experiences created in this way, but I'm not a musician, and I'm not an avid consumer of music. I'm not knowledgeable about music. I'm at the Sensorica lab, and here we have hammers, screws, 3D printers, electronic equipment, computers. So we need musicians to come and soak in this type of environment that we have, and start jamming. Just start jamming. So I invite local people from Montreal just to come to the lab and have a case of beer in the middle, and just start playing some music. Just start having fun with the music, and I could be there to say, to guide you towards the core values of this culture, and to generate an experience that is emergent, that is stigmergic. We also need some people knowledgeable about music theory, so that we look at how music is structured and define some rules of composition and define some pheromones. I don't know, there could be a string of notes that are signaling to others where they could go next, what kind of follow-up they should play once they hear this kind of cue, okay, sound cue. So I think we just have to start by having fun, in spaces that are built on top of this peer-to-peer culture, which are maker spaces, fab labs. The Sensorica lab in Montreal is a type of space, and if you happen to be there, I invite you to come and jam with us. But anywhere in the world, you can find a community that has some sort of gathering in some physical space, and maybe just propose this experience. And sometimes these organizations, they have events in these kind of spaces, like workshops, hackathons. discussions, video nights, and so you can come there and enhance that experience by experimenting with peer-to-peer music. So I'm just opening up the debate. I hope we learn something. I hope I give you a taste for it and the passion for it. This is a great opportunity. This is a movement that now is probably millions of people strong. This is a culture that has grown exponentially since the 90s, and it's about to explode in the mainstream. And this is a culture without a music. If you're looking for an opportunity and a purpose, I invite you to jam with us. Thank you for putting up with this long video.